But we're going to take a quick break here. We've got
Gotta get
video
some
from Kamran Pasha.
Indeed. And to introduce that real quickly, on Wednesday, we spoke about this writers
Workshop.
workshop.
Yeah.
Both writers and directors workshop that had been shut down by Warner, and then they did a 180 and they reinstated them because of the industry blowback less than 24 hours later. But not where they were. They were now shifted to the diversity unit of Warner. Now, is this good or is this bad? We were speaking about this on Wednesday. Kamran would have liked to join us. He would have liked to be here now, but he is busy. For those that wonder, Kamran, he is working on a project that is proceeding very nicely. More details cannot be shared at this time. They will be shared when that is possible. For that reason, he's not here right now. But he wanted to chime in on this particular subject because it's something that he has personal experience with, both this workshop, and he has some thoughts on what happened with it in the years since he was there, and also the current state of it, or what might happen forward with it now that it's going under the diversity aspect. So, yeah, Tom, play video.
All right, here we go. Here is Mr. Kamran Pasha.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran Pasha, and I'm delighted to come back on to Midnight's Edge here. I've been away for a while, but I wanted to come back on, talk a little bit about some of the developments at Warner Brothers that I know there's been a big conversation about in the community. I regrettably wasn't able to join the live stream that was done a few days ago with my friends here at Midnight's Edge and great people like Strip Doctor who talked about some of the things that are happening. So I wanted to share my perspectives because I have a little bit of personal experience with regard to some of these events. So as some of you may have heard, Warner Brothers had a very well-regarded program called the Warner Brothers Television Workshop, which is, I think, almost 40 years old. And its primary purpose was to seek out and find minority writers and directors who hadn't been given a lot of opportunities, didn't have access to what I like to call the club, the powerful structure of Hollywood. And open doors for them, and also to train them to be better writers and better directors. And I'm a graduate of that program. I went through the Fresh Voices arm of that program in 2011, and so I got into it. Coming in, I was a minority, obviously Pakistani guy, Muslim guy, not a lot of us here in Hollywood. And I applied for the program. I got in, and that was a big deal because the program is very hard to get into at Warner Brothers. And that's the first thing I wanted to talk about, which is that, some people, whenever they hear about any of these kind of quote unquote affirmative action programs, the initial reaction is, here's just a quota system where underqualified people are being given opportunities that they're not ready for. Certainly the kind of thing that Malcolm X, who was a big hero of mine, would have critiqued, who's very much an opponent of quota systems and putting people in situations where essentially they would be tokens. And so that's not what this program was, certainly when I experienced it. It was something that was very hard to get into. There's only about 8 people or so get in a year. You're usually rejected. You have to reapply, and you had to have really substantial work that got you in there, because once in the program, you would actually have access to the highest level of Warner Brothers television executives. We're talking people that essentially ran the studio and ran the network. And that's not something that they wanted to give to any Joe Blow coming off the street, who said, well, I'm a person of color or BIPOC or whatever the current term is, and I need access. And that wasn't how it worked. And so I was very honored to get into the program. I then went through a very grueling 1-year process where I came up with an idea, a pitch for a television pilot. And that 1 year was working in this program with other successful writers. Some of them I would end up working with later professionally. Albert Kamen, Nikita, and others rose up through that program. And we were all sitting there in a seminar with these Warner executives. And we went through the entire process of coming up with our concept for our pilot, developing the structure of the story, outline all that eventually to script, and then they would all get torn apart. I mean, it was a really aggressive program and forcing you to up your game. And I remember when I was so proud that I handed in my pilot to the that I thought was the best thing I had written, and they just ripped it apart. They just ripped it apart, and I felt completely humiliated. And then they said, you got to start over. You know, it's not good enough. And I did. And the end result was, after a full year, I had a pilot called Enigma, which is still a writing sample I still use today. And it's something that gets me work. So that's what that program was capable of doing. Now, I've heard, and I know my friend Script Doctor has said that he's heard that in the last several years, the program changed from being the sort of meritocracy that I experienced and becoming more of a political indoctrination kind of thing. That wouldn't surprise me. You know, the world we've been in since 2016, 2017 has been very much like that in Hollywood. We've talked about that a lot on Midnight's Edge. And so it should not shock us. And, you know, I think the leadership of Ms. Ann Sarnoff and the Warner Brothers certainly pushed it in a very political agenda of Warner Brothers. It changed in many ways the nature of that studio, where I have worked quite a bit. I worked on that, you know, for the Nikita and other shows. I still get residual checks from Warner Brothers Television, right? And so I've been employed there several times, and it was a good studio. So that's a studio that then went through a lot of chaos in the last several years, partly because there's perhaps primarily because there's political ideology that was disconnecting from the customer base. And so now we've had the situation where David Zaslav from Discovery has purchased Warner Brothers. And in the last several months, he's very aggressively done what he should do as an executive, which is cost cutting, trimming out the fat, going through the programs and saying what's worth saving, what's not. Regrettably, they decided to cut, at least earlier this week, decided to cut the Warner Brothers Television Workshop as something they decided, well, it's not, you know, bottom line, it's not making us a lot of money. Now, setting aside the comments about whether that workshop has become something that perhaps it wasn't before, the very idea of the workshop and the way that I experienced it was something that is of economic value to Warner Brothers and the industry. The meritocratic system that I experienced, the one that pushed writers to be better, that one that said to minority writers, that script's not good enough, you won't be able to compete with that script, go back and fix it if you want to compete. That's the kind of program we want for anyone, and especially for people that aren't getting access at a real level. And so when I heard that Warner Brothers decided to cut that program, and it caused shockwaves throughout the industry, because it was such an established program for 40 years and has produced some very successful writers and directors from there who are very, making a lot of money for the system. It hurt me personally because I was advanced by it, and it aided my life in a way that was very real, and it forced me to be better. And it made me think how many other people are not going to be given that chance. So when that came out, there was a huge uproar. And within 24 hours, Warner Brothers came out and said, no, you're right. We're not going to discontinue this, but we're going to move it on the accounting ledger from the main studio into the DEI, the Diversity Equity Initiative part. Now, my view as a minority is that as I just said a bit earlier to my Caucasian screenwriter friend, most of these DEI initiatives in corporations in general, and Hollywood in particular, the studios, are places that don't necessarily push minorities to be their best and force them to really compete in a world where they are the minority, and it's okay. And in all societies, there's a majority culture and a minority culture. It's true in Pakistan, where I was born, right? Christians and Hindus are minorities there, but they're still there. But I would suggest that most of these DEI programs that have been put out there are very much what Malcolm X would have critiqued, which is it's just there for show and for FaceTime, and doesn't really help people. In fact, has the opposite experience. One, if you see some of the comments on the trade articles about this development, there's been a lot of discussion about how diversity slots on television, lead actually to blocking people. So. And I've experienced this directly. I've worked on network television shows where what happens is that the network will have a slot for the diversity writer who comes in as a staff writer, the lowest level writer, and the studio will pay for that. So it doesn't come out of the show's budget. So no money of yours that could have gone into production goes into hiring this other writer. The studio is paying for that. And so they're brought on like, here, let's give an opportunity to a minority person. And I've seen this now in several shows where that person is brought in. They're not really treated with respect because the assumption is that they got in, because they weren't good enough, and we're giving them a handout. And even if they were talented, their talent wasn't really noticed. And at the end of the season, I consistently saw that person, because the studio will only finance one season of that person's salary, and then you either have to promote them to be an actual member of your writing staff that you're paying for as a show, or you have to let them go. And in every situation that I've been in, that person was always let go because just nobody wanted to promote them. They didn't take them seriously anyway, even if they did deserve to be taken seriously. They weren't taken seriously because they had the diversity, drama over them. And then the studio would bring in another new minority writer for the staff writer gig the next year, and that person would be fired at the end of the year. And it was just a revolving door. And I don't believe any single one of those young writers that I worked with on those diversity slots ever had a career. They never had a job after that. So the studio and the network, everyone got to feel very liberal and progressive and look at the opportunities we're giving when they're not giving people opportunities because people aren't advancing. And so that's a concern with a lot of these DEI initiatives is they don't actually advance minorities. They actually lock them into a degraded place, where they're looked down upon. And so the fact that this Warner Brothers TV workshop is now being reconstituted under the DEI initiative, it's not good news in my opinion. If people are concerned within Warner Brothers, rightly, if it has indeed turned into something that we would call the sort of the woke propaganda, which wasn't what I experienced in 2011, but if that's what it became in 2016 onwards, then let's address that. Let's address, going back to what it had almost 40 years worth of direct experience, which is hard work and bring your A game and rise to the occasion and force minorities to do so that they can survive in a marketplace that can be hostile. We have several decades of experience on how to do that in the Warner Brothers television program. So it doesn't make sense to me that the solution is you just put it under DEI where it's going to be treated with even more disrespect. You can imagine DEI will, they'll be ignored. And if you're concerned about political ideology, that's going to continue under that kind of structure. And so I think everyone's going to lose from this.
All right. Well, that's our buddy Cameron. Thank you for that, Cameron. We appreciate your point of view on it. Andre, follow up.
Those were some extremely salient points, and I can't really, I can't really argue with any of it. I think that the initiative, as it was intended and had been practiced for 40 years, by his description, was something really, really good, but then it's become perverted and become something else under the Sarnov regime. And I agree it would have been better to try to restore it to what it once was. But I would imagine that right now the corruption runs so deep, it is such a propaganda platform right now that probably be better off just sending it off to the diversity division where everything is going to be Marxist propaganda anyway, and then try to restart the program anew with new people going back to the original mission. That would be my hope for it.
I think the biggest thing about this whole thing is that the fact that it's been around for 40 years goes against everything that a lot of these people who destroyed this program have been trying to say, right? They've been trying to say that the world has been so racist for so long and all this crap. Well, if that's the case, then how did this program exist 40 fucking years ago? And then on top of it, like you said, it's been perverted now. Who has it been perverted by? The same people who should have supported it in the first place, clearly, or who were
the same
supported
people
by
who
it.
wanted to get rid of Batman and Superman and replace them with Supergirl and Batgirl to make DC less problematic and more inclusive.
This is kind of the same thing, like I was saying with what's her face from the Woman King, when she's like, if you don't come support this, then nobody's gonna come watch movie, or we're not gonna get any more black-led female films anymore. I'm like, she's being hyperbolic, but to a point, she's right, and it's going to be their fault, right? It's the same thing with bros.
I think the biggest problem
is
that
self-fulfilling prophecy at that point. But yeah,
you're skipping over the biggest problem is that the people that co-opted this were in support of it. They just didn't like the fact that it didn't do enough. That's the problem. That's how they were able to put it aside.
In their opinion,
in their opinion, that it didn't do enough, and it's tragic because I've mentioned on this show and other streams before. I've had friends who would fall under the minority aspect of things, who are really talented and were on their way to be great writers, and they got picked in some of these types of programs, not specifically from Warner Brothers, but they got picked. They were pushed into positions that they weren't ready for, and it ended up hurting their career. And in a lot of cases, they didn't go back to writing anymore. And we, as a result of those actions, are now paying for it because someone who just needed that 1 year, like what Cameron described, or a couple of years of good mentorship and being challenged to do better and bring their A game and so forth, could have put out some really fantastic stories for us as an audience to enjoy. But now we're never going to get that because the wrong perspective of bringing these types of people in and just letting them either sit where they were and saying that they're and giving them affirmation as opposed to challenging them, which is what you need to do for younger writers, especially if you're bringing them into these types of programs. Is it's like, if we're investing in you, you got to return that investment by making us stories that we can sell for hundreds of millions of dollars. We have to make money if we're going to invest in you. And if you can't do it, we'll find someone else, but we'll and the churn will continue. But it's a disservice if you have the program set in place and all it is says, okay, you check these boxes, you're this writer, write a pilot, and now we can't criticize it. Now we're going to have to workshop it. Now we're going to have to place you into a show where you work there for a year, and maybe you get a job, maybe you don't, and you're burning money and basically dangling a bait in front of someone who maybe really would love to have this career, and you're not pushing them into the direction where they could grab the hook and then be a part of the actual industry. You're keeping them at arm's length all the time because you're giving them affirmation as opposed to encouragement.
But I have a question. It's still not an impediment to a career if you're like a lot of writers I know, myself included, when I was younger. The hunger is burning so hard, or the flame of hunger, whatever simile.
Well, I mean, a hungry writer never gives up. That's the thing.
Correct. That's my point. So how many? And there's two kinds of writers. There's the writers that are brought in. You're going to do episode 3 of show XYZ, and I can't do that. It's the journey person writer that cranks out the different episodes. That's and as also and perhaps on a show that is horrible, yet they've still been hired to write the script for it. That's a tough writing gig. So are those the kinds of writers that were going to these these kinds of workshops, or the people who develop into useful individual IP makers?
The friends that I had, they were all feature film writers. They all had great, really cool ideas. I helped them workshop some of their scripts for submission process, and their scripts were quite like the high concept, easy to digest, but just didn't hit all the beats that they needed to, missing certain character elements, like very rough, but the potential was there. And when we workshopped with them and we pushed them to submit to various contests and various internship programs and whatnot, they got some notoriety. But it was around, I think, 2017, I started noticing that when they would do their preliminary letters before they would apply to these positions, they would be getting accepted before even having to submit a script. And that's what raised a red flag with me. It's like, whoa, they're inviting you down without having read anything other than your initial submission form and basically your letter. And they're like, yeah, isn't it great? I said, no, it's actually worrisome because they're not. This is a merit-based industry. You succeed by making something great that sells, that people want to buy and whatnot.
Well, yeah, you're making somebody money. That's really the merit of it all.
And the other part too is I think you can kill the hunger if you give someone so much hope and then hit them with a crushing defeat, as opposed to like the smaller things that come incrementally when you're developing a script in a more of a workshop part. I think what I hear from those stories back in the day, I think what ended up happening is that they got skipped over that developmental process, and they thought that what they had was, the next big hit. And when it hit to that point where like, nope, this is not going to be good enough. I'm sorry, we did what we could, and we're not going to do any of we're not going to proceed with your project. I think it crushed them because while they said that they did what they could, when you hear the stories of the workshops and stuff, it was all affirmation. There was no challenge, no real questions of what was going on. So for that entire time, they thought they were doing everything right. And then at the end, they're told, no, it's not good enough. Sorry. Bye-bye. And I think that can do a lot of damage to a very young upcoming writer.
So they were being led.
I felt like they were being led in some cases. I remember one, he was a good friend of mine in college. who wanted to be a writer for film and television. He's now going into novels. But he got invited onto a show that was being done for Bell Media. And it was an awesome gig. But nobody would listen to him. Like, he was just in the room. And nobody gave him the time of day. They didn't ask him to get coffee or do any of the grunt worker stuff. He was just in there. He would say his ideas. He would make his notes. He would type up other people's stuff while they're in the writer's room. And he just hated it because he didn't feel like he was actually contributing, and that he chose to quit as opposed to just get fired or wait for it. He's like, they did not hire me for what I think is valuable about who I am. They hired me for his appearance. And yeah, so I mean, that it's something that I never would have imagined when I started hearing these stories. Like, it never really occurred to me when I got my internship at Paramount. I was one of 3 white people there, and everybody else, and all we had was a love of Star Trek and other Paramount properties, because that's how we got our internships. We got our spec scripts, we made our applications and whatnot, and we got brought in, and we had a blast. And then when Paramount split, we all lost those internships and then had to be on our own way, but we all had a lot of fun, and we knew that we were there because of our skills and dedication and not because of our appearances. And it was a slow boiling frog in a pot before we started realizing that some of the newer wave of writers coming in are not here for, they may have the hunger or appear that they have that want, but they didn't get there by the interest of the studios wanting to make money off of what they could put out. They got there by the studios wanting to, I guess, build reputation by saying we're not bigots because we're hiring these people. And I think that was a big mistake, and I hope that changes, because I'd hate to see someone who may fall into those categories and actually is, the next great writer, the next William Goldman would be. I mean, I would hate to see someone who has that potential be stymied because of politics and affirmation, as opposed to being encouraged and nurtured and, having a whip at their back saying, write more so we can make some money. Like, it's painful, but it's also useful and benefits a person in the long term, I think.
It'd be fun to create a studio called Bigot Studio, but they create the least bigoted content.
Yeah.
They actually did something like that in the world of finance. Vice Fund invested in tobacco and alcohol and landmines and all the nasty, horrible stuff, cluster bombs, that kind of stuff. It's a huge hit for as long as it lasted.
But at least they were honest.
Yeah, they were very honest. It was like a counter investment.
Yeah, that's a thoroughly decent thing to do, because at least you know where your money is going.
Yeah, honest and greedy are good tactics, I think.
Yep.
Yeah. With that, let us move on. We have a few more super chats to go through here, don't we, Tom?
And by the way, that was a great video. Thanks for
Cameron.
Yes, also before we move on, thanks to Kamran
Cameron,
for chiming in. Everyone, you may have noticed that video had like some very obvious gaps in it. That's intentional. We only cut it down a little bit for speed for the live show. But go catch the full video. The full video is already live up on Midnight's Edge Live Archives, which is where you'll find all of our past live shows, in addition to best of clips. And among those is also then the full 17-minute video from Kamran. Go check it out. The link for that, to make it easy, is already in the description of this stream right here. So go check that out. Also, go visit Kamran Pasha on Patreon. Support him there if you haven't already. It's not just passive support, because he gives his industry analysis continuously to his Patreon supporters. So I highly recommend that. Go check that out as well if you haven't already.